The year was 1952, and Harlem's streets buzzed with attention thick enough to cut with a knife. Every corner boy, every hustler, every grandmother peering from behind lace curtains knew something big was coming. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the inevitable collision between two unstoppable forces, the New York Police Department and the man they called the Godfather of Harlem. Ellsworth Raymond Johnson, better known as Bumpy, sat in his favorite booth at Wells Restaurant on 7th Avenue. The mahogany wood gleamed under soft lighting, and the smell of perfectly seasoned steak filled the intimate dining room. His fork moved with deliberate grace as he cut into a medium-rare ribeye, each movement precise and unhurried. Across from him sat his wife Mamie, her elegant fingers wrapped around a crystal wine glass, her eyes filled with the kind of knowing that comes from 20 years of loving a man who danced with danger every single day. If you want to discover more incredible true stories about America's most fascinating criminals and the bold law enforcement officers who pursued them, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. New videos drop every week, and trust me, you will not want to miss what is coming next. Outside, 30 police officers formed a perimeter around the restaurant. 30, not 3 or 4 beat cops responding to a routine call. 30 armed agents from multiple precincts, coordinated by the mayor's office, backed by the FBI, and watched by every reporter in Manhattan who had gotten wind of what was about to go down. Detective Sergeant William Noonan stood at the front, his hand resting on his service revolver, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool October evening. This was not just another arrest. This was a statement, a show of force designed to prove that no one, not even Bumpy Johnson, stood above the law in New York City. But Bumpy Johnson had built his empire on one simple principle: respect. And respect in his world was earned through power, intelligence, and an unshakable calm in the face of chaos. Tonight, he would demonstrate all three. Let me take you back to understand how we got here. Back to 1905, when a boy named Ellsworth was born in Charleston, South Carolina, into a world that seemed determined to break him before he even had a chance to stand. His parents were poor, his opportunities were non-existent, and the color of his skin meant that society had already written his story before he could pen a single word himself. But Bumpy was different. Even as a child, he possessed something that could not be taught or bought: presence. When he walked into a room, people noticed. When he spoke, people listened. And when he decided something, heaven and hell combined, could not change his mind. His family moved to Harlem in 1919, when Ellsworth was just 14 years old. They were part of the Great Migration, hundreds of thousands of Black Americans, fleeing the brutal racism of the South, searching for opportunity in northern cities that promised freedom, but delivered only different shades of oppression. Harlem in 1919 was a powder keg. The neighborhood teemed with artists, musicians, poets, and dreamers, all creating what would become known as the Harlem Renaissance. But it also attracted those who sought power through darker means. The streets belonged to whoever was strong enough to claim them, and young Ellsworth Raymond Johnson learned quickly that strength came in many forms. He got the nickname Bumpy from a massive bump on the back of his head, the result of a childhood injury. Other kids might have been embarrassed by such a distinguishing mark. Bumpy wore it like a crown. He was different, and he made sure everyone knew it. By his 20s, Bumpy had already established himself as someone to be reckoned with. He worked for Stephanie St. Clair, known as the Queen of Numbers, running the numbers racket that kept Harlem's economy flowing. The numbers game was simple but brilliant. People bet small amounts on 3-digit numbers drawn from various sources, hoping to win payouts that could change their lives. For many in Harlem, it was the only gambling they could afford, the only dream they could chase. Stephanie St. Clair saw something special in young Bumpy. She trusted him with money, with operations, with decisions that could make or break her empire. And Bumpy never disappointed. He was smart, calculating, and absolutely fearless. But more than that, he understood something that many gangsters never grasped: the streets would follow you if you took care of them. When Dutch Schultz, a vicious white mobster from downtown, tried to muscle in on Harlem's numbers racket in the early 1930s, it was Bumpy Johnson who stood up to him. Dutch Schultz was notorious for his brutality, for sending messages written in blood. He thought Harlem would roll over, that black operators would bow to white, organized crime just like they bowed to white society. He thought wrong. Bumpy organized resistance. He coordinated with other operators. He hit back at Dutch's operations with precision strikes that showed strategic genius. When Dutch sent 10 men, Bumpy outsmarted them. When Dutch tried intimidation, Bumpy refused to flinch. The war was bloody, brutal, and it established Bumpy Johnson as a legend in his own time. Dutch Schultz was eventually murdered in 1935, shot in a Newark tavern by Murder Inc., on orders from Lucky Luciano and the Commission. With Dutch gone, Bumpy emerged as the undisputed power in Harlem's underworld. But unlike other gangsters who ruled through fear and violence alone, Bumpy Johnson ruled through respect. He paid for funerals when families could not afford them. He bought groceries for widows. He protected local businesses from predatory outsiders. When someone in Harlem needed help, they did not call the police. They called Bumpy Johnson, and he always answered. This made him both beloved and untouchable. The community protected him because he protected the community. Information about police raids reached him before the raids happened. Witnesses suddenly developed amnesia when investigators came asking questions. Bumpy Johnson was not just a criminal. He was a Robin Hood figure in a neighborhood that desperately needed heroes. But power always attracts enemies, and by 1952, those enemies had multiplied. The Federal Bureau of Narcotics, led by the notorious Harry Anslinger, had set its sights on Harlem. Mayor Vincent Impellitteri faced pressure from downtown business interests who wanted to clean up the city. And the NYPD, embarrassed by years of failed attempts to bring Bumpy in, wanted a win. They had tried before, dozens of times. Bumpy had been arrested, sure, but convictions were another matter entirely. Witnesses recanted, evidence disappeared, juries refused to convict, and each failed prosecution only added to Bumpy's mystique. So when the order came down in October 1952 to arrest Bumpy Johnson on racketeering charges, the brass decided to make it count. They would not send two detectives in an unmarked car. They would not try to catch him slipping. They would walk right up to his favorite restaurant in front of the entire neighborhood and take him in with overwhelming force. 30 officers, a statement arrest, a message to Harlem that the law was back in charge. Detective Sergeant Noonan had drawn the short straw. He was the one who had to walk through that restaurant door and put handcuffs on the most dangerous man in Harlem. The other officers waited outside, forming a cordon, their presence designed to prevent any rescue attempt or riot. Noonan pushed open the door to Wells' restaurant at exactly 7:15 p.m. The bell above the door chimed softly, a delicate sound at odds with the heavy tension that followed him inside. Conversations died mid-sentence. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Every eye in the restaurant turned to watch this white detective in his press suit walk toward the corner booth where Bumpy Johnson sat eating dinner with his wife. Bumpy looked up slowly, as if he had all the time in the world. His dark eyes met Noonan's, and something passed between them. Recognition, understanding. This was not personal. This was business. They were both professionals playing roles in a drama neither had written. "Mr. Johnson," Noonan said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins, "I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of racketeering and conspiracy. I need you to come with me." Bumpy set down his fork with care, patted his mouth with his napkin, and looked at his watch. Then he looked back at Noonan with an expression that was almost amused. "Detective," Bumpy said, his voice smooth as aged bourbon, "I can see you are a man who respects procedure. So I am going to ask you to respect mine. I am having dinner with my wife. When I finish my meal, I will come with you peacefully. Until then, you are welcome to wait." The audacity of it hung in the air like smoke. 30 cops outside, a warrant in hand, the full weight of the law bearing down, and Bumpy Johnson just told them to wait while he finished eating. Noonan's hand twitched toward his gun. Protocol said he should escalate, should force compliance, should remind this criminal who held the power here. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the way every person in that restaurant tensed, ready to spring into action if things went wrong. Maybe it was the calm certainty in Bumpy's eyes. Maybe it was the simple fact that forcing the issue would likely end in violence. In a crowded restaurant served no one. "Mr. Johnson," Noonan tried again, I have my orders. And I have my dinner, Bumpy replied, picking up his fork again. You have brought 30 men to arrest one. Surely you can afford to give me 30 minutes to finish my meal. I give you my word. I will not run. I will walk out that door with you when I am ready. But I will not be rushed. Mamie Johnson reached across the table and squeezed her husband's hand. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, but her face remained composed. She had known this day would come. They both had. The life they had chosen guaranteed it, but even knowing did not make it easier. Ellsworth, she whispered, using his given name, the one only she was allowed to use in private moments. You do not have to do this. Yes, I do, he replied gently. These people came to make a point, baby. But so am I. We do not bow. We do not break. And we do not let them take our dignity, even when they take our freedom. Noonan stood there, frozen in indecision. This was not covered in the manual. The suspect was supposed to comply or resist. Those were the two options. This third way, this dignified defiance, threw everything off script. Outside, the other officers grew restless. Minutes ticked by. Radios crackled with questions. What was the holdup? Why had Noonan not emerged with the suspect? Was there a problem? But inside Wells' restaurant, time moved differently. Bumpy ate his steak with deliberate slowness, savoring each bite. He asked Mamie about her day, about her sister's health, about the new curtains she wanted for the living room. They discussed ordinary things in extraordinary circumstances, maintaining normalcy in the face of chaos. It was a performance, yes, but it was also something more. It was resistance. Not the violent, dramatic kind that made headlines and got people killed, but the quiet, powerful kind that reminded everyone watching who really held the power here. The police could arrest his body, but they could not touch his spirit. They could take his freedom, but they could not take his dignity. Word spread through Harlem like wildfire. Bumpy Johnson was making the cops wait while he finished dinner. People abandoned their own meals, their card games, their evening routines to head toward Wells' restaurant. They wanted to witness history, to see their champion face down the machine one more time. The crowd outside swelled from dozens to hundreds. They did not threaten the police. They did not riot or rage. They simply stood there bearing witness. Their presence a reminder that Bumpy Johnson was not just some criminal the cops were hauling away. He was their protector, their provider, their symbol of resistance against systems that sought to grind them down. The police brass downtown monitored the situation via radio with growing alarm. This was not how it was supposed to go. The arrest should have been quick, clean, overwhelming. Instead, it had turned into a spectacle, a public relations disaster unfolding in real time. Captain Morrison, Noonan's superior, arrived on scene at 7:45, a full 30 minutes after Noonan had entered the restaurant. He pushed through the crowd, through the police cordon, and into Wells' restaurant with the kind of fury that comes from watching your carefully planned operation fall apart. He found Noonan standing awkwardly near Bumpy's table, looking like a maitre d' waiting for a difficult customer to finish their meal. Bumpy had moved on to dessert now, a slice of sweet potato pie that he ate with obvious enjoyment. What in God's name is going on here? Morrison demanded, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. Bumpy looked up at the captain with mild interest, as if noticing him for the first time. Good evening, Captain. Would you like to join us? The pie is excellent. Morrison's face turned crimson. Mr. Johnson, you are under arrest. This is not a negotiation. You will come with us now, or we will drag you out of here in handcuffs. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. The implicit threat hung heavy in the air. Drag Bumpy Johnson out in handcuffs in front of hundreds of his people? That was a recipe for a riot. Bumpy set down his fork one final time. He dabbed his mouth with his napkin, folded it neatly, and placed it beside his plate. Then he stood, smoothing down his suit jacket, a perfectly tailored piece that cost more than most Harlem residents made in a month. There is no need for dramatics, Captain, Bumpy said calmly. I told Detective Noonan I would come peacefully when I finish my meal. I am a man of my word. I have finished. He turned to Mamie, leaned down, and kissed her forehead. I will be home soon, baby. Do not worry about me. Make sure to call Archie about the lawyer. Mamie nodded, fighting back tears. I love you, Ellsworth. I love you too. Then Bumpy Johnson turned to face the two detectives, held out his wrists, and said the words that would echo through Harlem for generations. Gentlemen, I am ready now. Shall we? The walk from Wells' restaurant to the police wagon became the stuff of legend. Bumpy moved with his head high, his stride confident, making the handcuffs look like jewelry rather than restraints. The crowd parted for him like the Red Sea, people reaching out to touch his shoulder, to whisper encouragement, to promise they would take care of Mamie while he was gone. The police escort became less a show of force and more a funeral procession, with Bumpy as the dignified deceased being honored by his community. Officers who had come ready for a fight found themselves part of something entirely different, something that made them uncomfortable in ways they could not quite articulate. When they reached the police wagon, Bumpy paused before climbing in. He turned to face the crowd, his people, and he smiled. Not a cocky smile or a defiant smile, but a smile that said, "I will be okay. We will all be okay." This changes nothing about who we are. The crowd erupted, not in violence or anger, but in applause. They clapped for Bumpy Johnson like he was taking a curtain call, like he had just performed the greatest act any of them had ever witnessed. In a way, he had. The police drove him downtown to the precinct, where he was processed, fingerprinted, and photographed. His mugshot from that night shows a man completely at ease, his expression almost bemused, as if the whole situation was mildly entertaining rather than life-alteringly serious. The charges were serious. Racketeering carried a potential sentence of 20 years. The prosecution had gathered witness testimony, financial records, enough evidence to feel confident they could finally put Bumpy Johnson away for good. But they had made one critical miscalculation. They thought that by arresting Bumpy so publicly, so dramatically, they would break his mystique, would show Harlem that their hero was just another criminal who would crumble before the law. Instead, the opposite happened. The dinner delay became instant legend. The story spread not just through Harlem, but through every black neighborhood in America. Bumpy Johnson made 30 cops wait while he finished his meal. He controlled the situation even in handcuffs. He refused to let them take his dignity. For people who spent every day navigating a society designed to strip them of dignity at every turn, this was more than entertainment. It was instruction. It was inspiration. It was proof that grace under pressure was possible, that you could face overwhelming force without surrendering your humanity. The trial began in December 1952. The prosecution presented their case with confidence, laying out years of criminal activity, witness after witness testifying to Bumpy's control over Harlem's underworld. The evidence was substantial, damning, seemingly airtight. But Bumpy's lawyer, the brilliant Archie Crawford, had learned from his client. He did not deny that Bumpy was powerful in Harlem. He did not pretend Bumpy was some innocent businessman. Instead, he reframed the entire narrative. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Crawford said in his closing argument, "you have heard testimony about Mr. Johnson's activities. You have heard about his influence, his power, his control, but ask yourselves this: why? Why does this community protect him? Why do these witnesses, even under oath, speak of him with respect rather than fear?" He paused, letting the question sink in. Because Ellsworth Johnson has done more for Harlem than the police ever have. He has protected businesses when the law would not. He has fed families when the government turned its back. He has created order in a neighborhood that society abandoned. Is he perfect? No. Has he broken laws? Perhaps. But in a world where the law itself is unjust, where the system crushes rather than protects, can we truly condemn a man for stepping into the void? It was a dangerous argument, one that challenged the entire premise of the prosecution's case. The jury, made up of working-class New Yorkers who understood struggle even if they did not know Harlem, deliberated for 3 days. They came back with a split verdict: guilty on some minor charges, not guilty on the major racketeering counts. Bumpy was sentenced to 15 months in federal prison, far less than the prosecution wanted, but enough to save face. When the judge handed down the sentence, Bumpy showed no emotion. He simply nodded, thanked his lawyer, and prepared himself for what was to come. He had been to prison before. He knew how to survive it. And more importantly, He knew his empire would be waiting when he got out. During those 15 months, Bumpy's legend only grew. Letters poured into the prison from Harlem residents, from black communities across the country, from people who saw him as a symbol of resistance. He was not just a gangster anymore. He was a folk hero, a figure whose very existence challenged the narrative that black people had to accept their assigned place in society. He spent his time reading voraciously, studying philosophy, history, political theory. He emerged from prison in 1954 even sharper than when he went in, with new ideas about how to structure his operations, how to protect his community, how to build power that could not be easily dismantled. The dinner at Wells' restaurant was never forgotten. It became a story parents told their children, a parable about dignity and defiance. Years later, even after Bumpy's death in 1968, people still talked about the night he made 30 cops wait while he finished his meal. What made it resonate so deeply was not just the audacity of the act, but what it represented. In a world where black people, especially black men, were constantly told to defer, to submit, to know their place, Bumpy Johnson said no, not with violence, not with aggression, but with calm, dignified refusal to be rushed, to be bullied, to surrender control of even a simple dinner. The police thought they were making a statement about power, but Bumpy made a different statement. He showed that true power is not about force or numbers. It is about presence, about self-possession, about maintaining your humanity even when the system tries to strip it away. Detective Noonan would later tell colleagues that standing in that restaurant, watching Bumpy eat his dinner, was one of the strangest experiences of his career. "I had a gun," he said. "I had backup. I had the law on my side. But somehow he was in control. Not me. Him. And I did not know what to do about it." That confusion, that disruption of expected power dynamics, was precisely the point. Bumpy Johnson understood something fundamental about power. It is not just about what you can do. It is about what people believe you can do. It is about presence, reputation, the intangible force that makes others hesitate even when they hold all the cards. The Wells restaurant incident became a case study in criminal justice courses decades later. Professors used it to discuss power dynamics, community policing, the complex relationship between marginalized communities and law enforcement. What should Noonan have done differently? Should Morrison have forced the issue? Was allowing Bumpy to finish his meal a tactical error or smart de-escalation? The answer, of course, depends on what you think the goal should have been. If the goal was simply to arrest Bumpy Johnson, then yes, they could have dragged him out immediately. But the goal was also to demonstrate that the law was supreme, that no one could defy it with impunity. In that sense, they failed completely. Bumpy turned their show of force into his own demonstration of power. He made them wait on his terms, then walked out with dignity intact. The community saw not an arrest but a man choosing to cooperate when he was ready, maintaining control even in handcuffs. This is why the story endures. It captures something essential about the nature of resistance, about dignity in the face of oppression, about the ways marginalized people create power in systems designed to deny them any. Bumpy Johnson was not a saint. His empire was built on illegal gambling, on activities that hurt some even as they helped others. But in that restaurant on that October night in 1952, he became something more than a gangster. He became a symbol of defiance, of grace under pressure, of the refusal to let anyone, even the full force of the law, take away your humanity. Wells Restaurant closed its doors in 1967, a year before Bumpy's death. But the corner booth where he sat that night became a pilgrimage site of sorts. People would stand outside the shuttered building, pointing to the window, telling their children or grandchildren about the night Bumpy Johnson made 30 cops wait for dinner. When Bumpy died of a heart attack in 1968 at age 62, thousands attended his funeral. The streets of Harlem were packed with mourners, many of whom had never met him personally, but felt they knew him through his legend. Politicians came, musicians came, business people came. And yes, police officers came too, paying their respects to a man they had spent decades trying to catch. Among the attendees was a retired Detective Noonan, who stood at the back of the church, hat in hand. When asked by a reporter why he had come, he said simply, Because he was a worthy adversary. Because in 40 years on the force, I never met another man quite like him. Because that night at Wells Restaurant taught me more about power and dignity than any training manual ever did. The story of that dinner has been told and retold, embellished and mythologized, but the core truth remains. On October night in 1952, when 30 armed police officers came to arrest him, Bumpy Johnson did not run. He did not fight. He did not panic. He finished his dinner. It was an act of resistance so simple and so profound that it resonated across generations. In a world designed to strip Black people of agency, of dignity, of control over even the smallest aspects of their lives, Bumpy Johnson said, "I will leave when I am ready." And incredibly, impossibly, they let him. That is power. Not the power to hurt or intimidate, but the power to define yourself on your own terms, to maintain your humanity even when the system wants to reduce you to a number, a case file, a statistic. It is the power to eat your dinner slowly, deliberately, savoring each bite, even when 30 cops are waiting outside. We live in a different world now. The Harlem that Bumpy Johnson ruled has changed dramatically. The numbers racket is gone, replaced by state lotteries that do legally what he did illegally. The social conditions that created space for figures like Bumpy have evolved, though certainly not disappeared. But the lesson of Wells Restaurant remains relevant. When faced with overwhelming force, when confronted by systems designed to break you, dignity is resistance. Maintaining your humanity is rebellion. Refusing to be rushed, to be bullied, to surrender control over your own narrative. That is power. Bumpy Johnson understood this, intuitively. He knew that how he handled that arrest would matter more than the arrest itself. He knew his community was watching, that they needed to see him face this challenge with the same grace he faced everything else. And he knew that by controlling the timing, by making them wait, by walking out on his terms, he won a victory that transcended the immediate situation. The mugshot they took that night shows a man smiling slightly, as if he knew something they did not. And perhaps he did. Perhaps he knew that arrests and trials and prison sentences were temporary, but legend was forever. Perhaps he knew that what happened in Wells Restaurant that night would be remembered long after the charges were forgotten. And he was right. 60 years later, we still tell the story. We still marvel at the audacity, the composure, the sheer force of personality required to make 30 cops wait while you finish your meal. We still study the incident, debate its implications, use it as a lens to understand power, resistance, dignity, and the complex dynamics between marginalized communities and state authority. Bumpy Johnson was many things. A criminal, certainly. A protector, undeniably. A husband, a friend, an employer, a community leader. But on that October night in 1952, he was also an artist, painting a masterpiece with the simplest of materials. A steak dinner, 30 minutes, and unshakable calm. The painting hangs in our collective memory still. We see him there in that corner booth, fork in hand. Mamie across from him, Detective Noonan frozen in awkward uncertainty. We see the crowd gathering outside. We see the police wagon waiting. We see the moment stretched taut between cooperation and defiance, between submission and resistance. And we see Bumpy Johnson finishing his dinner.